daughter sent me a photo of a coffee mug at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. That was it. Just a coffee mug, white with a small blue stripe around the rim, sitting on what looked like a kitchen counter I didn't recognize. No caption, no explanation. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I set it face down on my desk, stood up, and walked to the window. The mug was ours, or one just like it, the kind we'd bought at a gas station in rural Tennessee when she was 11 years old, and we were driving back from my mother's funeral and she'd spilled her chocolate on the seat, and we'd stopped and I'd bought her a new drink in the cheapest mug they had, and she'd kept it for years on her nightstand just because it was from that trip, from that particular sad day when we'd held each other up. We'd talked about that mug once, a few years ago, over the phone. She'd said she still had it somewhere. I'd said I remembered. We had never discussed it as a signal. We had never planned anything like that, but she'd sent it to me and nothing else. And my daughter is not the kind of person who sends unexplained photos on a Tuesday morning. My name is Lawrence Pluitt. I'm 57 years old. For 19 years, I worked as a senior investigator for the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection, based out of Atlanta. I reviewed thousands of fraud cases. I trained younger investigators on the psychology of deception, how it gets built, how it gets sustained, how it collapses. I have sat in rooms with people who'd make you feel, in the space of 20 minutes, that they genuinely cared about your well-being while they were systematically taking everything you had. I knew what I was looking at. I just didn't know the shape of it yet. My daughter's name is Corinne. She's 29, lives in Columbus, Ohio, works as a physical therapist at a rehab center near downtown. She is careful and observant and she does not panic easily. When she was in college and a classmate tried to pressure her into signing a joint lease she didn't want, she just quietly declined, moved on, didn't spiral. That's who she is. So, when I called her back and she picked up on the second ring and said, a little too brightly, "Hey Dad, I already knew something was wrong. I got your photo," I said. A pause, brief, but I caught it. "Oh yeah, I was cleaning out a box and found it. Thought you might like to see." Corinne. Another pause, longer. Then quietly, not on the phone. I drove to Columbus the next morning. 6 hours. I told my wife, Beck, that Corinne just needed some help with a work situation, which was true enough that I could say it without my voice doing anything strange. Bet has known me for 31 years. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and didn't push it, which meant she already suspected it was more than that and was giving me room to handle it first. Corinne met me at her door in jeans and a flannel shirt, hair pulled back, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. We hugged, she made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table, which is small and wood, and has one leg that's slightly shorter than the others, and she wrapped both hands around her mug the same way she's been doing since she was a teenager. "How long?" I said. She looked at the table. 7 months. "Tell me from the beginning." His name was Callum Vredy. She'd met him at a fundraiser for the rehab center, the kind of event where a few local businesses sponsor a dinner and everyone stands around in business casual making conversation. He was there representing a financial planning company, she said, though she couldn't remember exactly which one. He was 38, well dressed in a way that didn't seem like he was trying too hard, and he asked her about her work with genuine curiosity and remembered the details when he referenced them later in the same conversation. They exchanged numbers. He texted the next day, not immediately, but the next day, which she said felt right, like he wasn't anxious about it. She took a breath. They'd been dating for 5 months before he mentioned anything financial. She wanted me to hear that part clearly. 5 months of dinners, of weekend drives, of meeting two of his friends, of him bringing her soup when she had a sinus infection in February. 5 months before a single word about money. When it came gently. He said he'd been working with some clients on a structured investment vehicle. He called it a Tier 1 income trust that operated outside traditional brokerage channels. Better returns, he said. Less overhead from institutional middlemen. He was matter of fact about it, not pushy, and he only mentioned it because she'd said, offhand, that she'd been meaning to move her 401k money somewhere with better performance. She had about $47,000 in her 401k. I kept my face exactly where I wanted it. Had he seen the statements? Did he know the amount? She looked at the table again. I think I mentioned it. I don't remember exactly, but probably. I asked her what happened after that first conversation. She said it sort of settled, went quiet for a few weeks, and then he sent her a document. She'd printed it out for me, which I appreciated. She knew I'd want to see it on paper. It was a 20-page prospectus for something called the Meridian Tier 1 Income Trust. Registered address in Scottsdale, Arizona, clean fonts, professional layout, color-coded performance graphs showing 6 years of returns averaging between 14 and 19% annually. I read the disclosure section first. It referred to something called the Meridian Investor Protection Covenant, which was described as a companion document available upon request. No link, no attachment. The section on underlying assets described secured private lending facilities backed by a diversified portfolio of hard assets, which is a sentence that technically means nothing. Hard assets. The phrase is designed to suggest real estate, equipment, physical collateral, but it commits to none of that. You could back a private lending facility with a storage unit in Tucson and technically satisfy that language. The Scottsdale address, I already knew before I looked it up, would be a registered agent service. I looked it up anyway. It cost $75 a month and forwarded mail. He's asked you to move money, I said. It wasn't a question. Not asked. He sent a subscription form last month. He said there was an enrollment window that closed at the end of April. She looked at me steadily. That's when I sent you the photo. 2 weeks before the deadline, I put the prospectus down. I needed a minute to just be her father before I went back to being the other thing I am. I looked at this person I'd watched grow up, who used to fall asleep in the backseat of the car on long drives and who'd gotten straight B's in high school because she was always more interested in actual things than in grades and who'd chosen physical therapy because she wanted to help people recover from real physical pain. And I thought about Callum Brady bringing her soup in February. She told me she loved me. Nathan had said in a story a colleague once walked me through. A different case, different city, same architecture. He said it flat and quiet, the way people speak when they're processing something structural, not just emotional. Corinne didn't say that, but I could see it in the way she was sitting that something had gotten in. Do you still have the subscription form? I said. She did. She had everything. Emails, texts, the prospectus, 2 follow-up documents he'd sent, a handwritten note he'd left with a bottle of wine when she was working late one evening and he'd stopped by her building. She'd kept it all in a folder, which told me her instincts had already been running before her conscious mind was ready to name what she was running them for. Is he still contacting you? I asked. Checking in, nothing pressured. He texted yesterday to ask if I wanted to grab dinner Friday. Warm, patient, unhurried, all exactly calibrated. That night I sat at Corinne's kitchen table after she went to bed and I went through everything in the folder with a yellow legal pad and a pen and a cup of coffee that went cold about an hour in. The performance graphs in the prospectus cited no custodian and no independent auditor. The return figures, 14 to 19% annually across 6 years, were mathematically implausible for a legitimately secured lending fund. Legitimate private credit funds operating in that space return somewhere between 7 and 11% in a strong year, and that's before fees. Numbers above 14% are not a selling point. They are a signature. The subscription minimum was $10,000. A preferred allocation was available for commitments over $40,000. Corinne had $47,000. I knew two people I needed to talk to. The first was a woman named Deborah Stein, who had run securities fraud investigations for the SEC's Office of Investor Education and Advocacy in Washington before moving back to her hometown in Ohio to be closer to her parents. We'd worked adjacent cases twice in the mid-2000s, and she was exactly as sharp now as she'd been then. I texted her at 11:30 at night and asked if she could talk in the morning. She replied within 4 minutes, yes. The second was a man named Hector Paulino, who had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant for the DOJ's fraud section and now ran an independent consulting practice out of Cincinnati. Hector could tell you, within the first page of a financial document, whether the math was built to perform or built to deceive. I texted him the same message. He also replied quickly. We made plans. Deborah called at 7:50 the next morning. I gave her the name Meridian Tier 1 Income Trust, the Scottsdale address and Callan Vrede. She was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone pulling a thread. Give me 2 hours. She said. Hector called at 8:15. I read him sections of the prospectus over the phone. He stopped me twice to ask me to repeat phrases. When I finished the section on asset backing, he was quiet long enough that I could hear him breathing. Lawrence, he said, there's no schedule of collateral anywhere in this document. I know. A real private credit fund, even an unregistered one operating in a gray area, would attach a schedule. It would list the specific loans, the specific collateral, something you could theoretically verify. This has nothing. It's a wrapper with nothing inside. If someone invested and then the fund reported losses or a default, there would be no way to confirm that any underlying asset ever existed. None. I thanked him and sat with that for a minute. Deborah called back at 9:55. He's real, she said, in that flat specific tone that means real but complicated. Callum Vrede, 38, grew up in Michigan, studied finance at Michigan State, worked 4 years at a legitimate RIA, registered investment advisor, in Detroit before he was terminated. The firm filed a complaint with FINRA. The complaint is closed, but it's in the record. What was it? Undisclosed outside business activity. He was directing clients to an outside investment vehicle without the firm's knowledge or approval. One client, a retired school teacher, 64 years old, moved $55,000 into the vehicle before the firm caught it. The fund had no registration. The client recovered about $8,000 through a civil settlement. The rest is gone. I closed my eyes. There it was. The dry run, smaller scale, same pattern, refined and reapplied. The soup in February wasn't kindness, it was investment. 5 months of building a relationship that felt real because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that the relationship had to feel real for the rest to work. Is Meridian registered anywhere? I said. No registered fund by that name in any state. No SEC registration, no FINRA registration, no Spintrust Securities registration in Arizona or Ohio or anywhere else I can find. So he's running an unregistered securities offering. At minimum, potentially wire fraud depending on how the transfers are structured. The issue is building enough before the window closes and he walks. She paused. How close is she? Subscription form already sent. April 30 deadline, 12 days. How much is at risk? My daughter's 401 key, 47,000. A longer pause. Deborah and I had both sat across from families who'd lost everything. Retirement accounts drained, mortgages taken out, adult children who'd believed in something that turned out to be a person in a particular costume. This was the first time one of those calls had involved someone who called me dad. Okay, she said. Here's what we need. She needed Corinne to agree to one more meeting. She needed Callum to make the full investment pitch on record, to describe the fund, state the return projections, ask for the commitment, and provide wire transfer details. In Ohio, a party to a conversation may record that conversation without disclosing that recording to the other party. If Corinne recorded it herself, on her own phone, in her own conversation, that recording would be admissible. She'll have questions, I said. Of course. But Lawrence, she sent you the photo. She already knows what this is. She's been waiting for someone to tell her what to do with that knowledge. She was right. I drove back to Corinne's apartment from the coffee shop, where I'd been making calls, and I sat down across from her at that uneven table, and I told her everything. The FINRA complaint, the retired school teacher in Detroit who lost $47,000 and recovered $8,000 and probably still thinks about it. The Scottsdale address that was a mail forwarding service. Hector's analysis of the collateral section. The return figures that function, in my industry, less as projections and more as tells. Corinne sat very still through all of it. She had her hands flat on the table, and she was looking at a fixed point just past my shoulder. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, I kept thinking I was being paranoid. You weren't. I kept telling myself I'd been hurt before and I was just projecting. Corinne. I waited until she looked at me. Your instincts were working correctly the whole time. The fact that you felt something and you reached out, that's the thing that made everything else possible. Most people don't. They feel it and they wait and they're embarrassed about feeling it. And they wait a little longer, and by then the money is gone and the person is somewhere else with a different name and a different fund. She looked at me. What do I need to do? I explained the recording. I explained that she would need to respond to his dinner invitation and let him take the meeting wherever he wanted to take it. That she should let him make the full pitch. Let him describe the fund. Let him state the returns. Let him name the enrollment window. Let him provide wire transfer details. She should not confront him. She should not tip him. She should not tip him. She should be a woman who is almost ready to say yes. Can you do that? I said. My daughter is quiet for a moment in the way she has been quiet since she was a child, when she was actually thinking rather than just waiting to speak. Then she said, yes, but I want it to be over. It will be. She texted him that evening and told him she'd been reading through the subscription form and had a few things she wanted to clarify before she moved forward. She said she didn't want to rush it over text. He responded within 20 minutes, warm and unhurried, and suggested dinner Thursday at a place she liked near her apartment. Thursday morning, I drove back to Columbus. We sat at her kitchen table and I walked her through it, phone in the front pocket of her jacket, voice memo app already running, screen locked. Let him talk. Don't be direct. If he paused, let the silence exist. People fill silence. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral, interested tone. Not skeptical, not eager, just present. Be a woman who is almost there. She nodded through all of it. When I asked how she was feeling, she looked at the window for a moment. Angry, she said, but the kind where you just want to do the thing and have it be over. That's exactly right, I said. Stay there. I drove back to bed. I had told her everything the night before. Sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, going through the whole shape of it. She'd listened without interrupting, which is a particular skill she has, and when I finished, she said, very practically, "What do you need me to do?" I told her I needed her to be here when I got home Thursday night. She said, of course. We didn't talk much Thursday. She made dinner and I helped clean up, and we listened to the video, and at some point, she put her hand on my arm briefly in that way she has, and I knew she was thinking about Corinne, the way I was thinking about Corinne, which is the particular way you think about your children when something is happening to them, and you can't stand between them and it. You can only hand them the tools and wait. Corinne texted at 9:22 p.m. 3 words, got it all. She called 10 minutes later. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the adrenaline working its way out. She said he'd been thorough and clear and completely committed to the performance. He described the fund structure in detail. He projected annual returns of 16 to 19%. He told her the April 30 enrollment window was a hard close due to the fund's capital structure, that the managers needed to know committed capitals before beginning the next lending cycle. He provided the wire transfer details, an account at a credit union in Nevada, which she read off to me and I wrote down. He told her that once funds were received, her money would be allocated within 96 hours. 96 hours. I knew what that meant. By the time any investor realized the fund didn't exist and the credit union account had been swept, 96 hours was enough time to move money through sufficient layers to make recovery extremely difficult. I called Deborah that night. She asked for the audio file to be sent to her encrypted email, which Corinne did within the hour. Deborah called me at 7:15 the next morning. It's enough, she said. We're moving this to the U.S. Attorney's office today. Lawrence, this is clean. She was clear. He was clear. The wire details are on record. This is what we needed. I did not ask about the details of what followed. That part wasn't mine to be involved in, and I'd spent enough years knowing exactly how these things unfold to understand that watching it happen doesn't make it better. What I can tell you is that Callum Brady was taken into federal custody on Monday morning. I know this because Corinne called me at 8:40 a.m. and said, very quietly, "It happened, Dad." I said, "Good." She said, "Yeah," and then neither of us said anything for a moment, and I could hear her breathing and she could probably hear me breathing, and that was enough. The investigation that followed established that Callum had run versions of the Meridian Fund into other states under two different fund names. Across all identifiable victims, 9 people, total losses exceeded $620,000. Several of those victims had already transferred money before Corinne ever met him at that fundraiser dinner. She was the only one who hadn't lost a dollar. A month later, she drove down to see us for a long weekend. Beth made a full dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the green bean casserole she's been making since the kids were small. And the three of us sat at the table that's been in our dining room for 22 years and ate and talked about nothing consequential for a while, which felt exactly like the right thing to do. After dinner, Beth went to call her sister and Corinne and I sat on the back porch with our coffee, even though it was cold enough that we both kept our jackets on. The yard was dark and the neighbors had a light on in their kitchen window, and somewhere down the street someone was walking a dog. I keep going back to February, she said. I waited. When he brought me the soup, I had a 102 fever and I couldn't go to work, and he just showed up with soup and crackers. And he sat with me for 2 hours and watched bad television and didn't try to make it into anything. It just felt like, she stopped. Like someone who cared, I said. Yeah. I looked at the neighbor's kitchen window. That's the part that's hard to talk about in a clear way. Because that afternoon probably did happen the way it felt. Whatever he was running, he was also spending real time with you, and some of that time it was probably not entirely a performance. People are complicated that way. What he was doing was wrong and harmful and deliberate. That doesn't mean every single moment was manufactured. What it means is that he made a choice about how to use those moments, and that choice belongs to him, not to you. She was quiet for a while. Do you think he knew the whole time? Like, from the beginning? I think the beginning and the ending were always the same plan, I said. What happened in between probably felt real enough to him to maintain. People who do this long enough, they get good at meaning it in the moment. That's part of what makes them effective, and part of what makes it particularly hard to feel afterward. She nodded slowly and looked at her coffee mug. I almost didn't send you the photo, she said. I looked at her. I almost talked myself out of it 3 times. I kept thinking, I'm being paranoid. He's been nothing but good to me. What am I going to tell Dad? My boyfriend is too nice. I think something's wrong. She shook her head. I almost just filled out the subscription form. But you didn't. No. Why not? She thought about it for a moment. Because I knew you'd know what to look at. And I knew that if I sent the photo and you told me I was wrong, I'd believe you. And if I sent it and you said I wasn't wrong. She stopped. I just needed someone I trusted to look at it with me. That's all. I want to say that clearly because I have spent close to 2 decades watching what happens in the cases where no one sends the photo, where the person feels the wrongness and decides they're being irrational, where they're embarrassed to say it out loud because what if they're wrong? What if they ruin something good? What if the person they're suspicious of is actually fine and they've just been broken by previous experience? So they wait, and the window closes and the money moves, and the person is in a different city with a different name and the victim is sitting across from a federal investigator trying to explain why they didn't say anything earlier. Here is what I want you to take from this, because I didn't spend 19 years doing what I did to keep it to myself. Fraud like this is built to be invisible from the inside. It targets people who are emotionally open, people who want to believe in good things and good people, which is not a weakness, it is the thing that makes ordinary life possible. The people who run these schemes are patient. They do not rush. They build something genuine before they ever introduce the financial piece, and by the time they do, what's being asked for doesn't feel like a financial transaction. It feels like participation in something shared. The numbers that should stop you, anything projecting consistent annual returns above 10% in a private fund with no institutional oversight, deserves extreme scrutiny. Between 14 and 19% is not a high return. It is a warning. Legitimate private credit vehicles return what the market supports. They don't outperform it by 8 percentage points because of less overhead. Any investment vehicle operating in the United States is required to be registered with either the SEC or its state-level equivalent, unless it qualifies for a very specific exemption, and even then, the exemption is documented and verifiable. You can search any registered investment advisor, broker-dealer, or fund through the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database at advisorinfo.sec.dat6.gov and through Findway Broker Check at brokercheck.findra.org. Both are free. Both take less time than a commercial break. If someone cannot point you to a verifiable registration, that is not a regulatory technicality. That is the shape of the problem. And if someone in your life reaches out to you, in whatever way they have, through whatever signal exists between you, please listen. Corinne sent me a photo of a coffee mug she hadn't mentioned in 3 years. because some part of her already understood what was happening and needed a way to reach across the distance without saying it directly. She reached, I was there to catch it. That's the whole thing, really. Not the investigation, not the recording, not the arrest. The whole thing is just she reached and I was there. If your gut is telling you something about a situation, about a person, about a number that sounds too good, it is not nothing. It has never been nothing. The only question is whether you let yourself act on it before the window closes. Please don't wait. Reach out whatever way you know how. Let someone you trust look at it with you. We sat on the porch until the cold got serious enough that Beck came to the door and told us we were being ridiculous. And the three of us went inside and Corinne fell asleep on the couch under the old blanket that's been in this house since before she was born. And Beck and I sat in the kitchen for a while not saying much, and it was just an ordinary night at home. After everything, that felt like the right thing to be. I've thought a lot about what actually saved Corinne's money. People assume it was the investigation, the calls to Deborah, the forensic analysis, the recording on Thursday night, and those things mattered. But they were only possible because of something much smaller that happened first. A photo, sent on a Tuesday morning, of a coffee mug she hadn't mentioned in years. That's the part I keep coming back to. Because here's what I know. After nearly 2 decades of watching these cases from the inside, the investigation, the arrest, the recovery of evidence, all of that is downstream of one decision. The decision to reach out. Everything else depends on that single moment when a person feels something wrong and chooses to say so rather than talk themselves back into silence. Corinne almost didn't send the photo. She told me she'd talked herself out of it 3 times. And I understand exactly why. There is something deeply uncomfortable about naming a fear you can't yet fully justify, especially when the fear involves someone who has been warm and present and genuinely kind to you. The mind wants to resolve that discomfort by deciding it isn't real, by calling itself paranoid, by waiting just a little longer to see if the feeling passes. The feeling rarely passes. It just gets buried under more time and more evidence that the person is wonderful until the window closes and the money is gone and the feeling surfaces again in a federal investigator's office, wearing a different expression entirely. What Corinne did took a kind of quiet courage that I think doesn't get named clearly enough. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't make accusations. She just refused to let herself be talked out of her own instincts, and she reached toward someone she trusted to help her look at what she was seeing. That is not a small thing. That is, in my experience, the rarest thing. And Callum Vrede, whatever his story is, whatever sequence of choices brought him to a fundraiser dinner where he decided to invest 5 months of genuine warmth into someone's trust specifically so he could take her retirement savings. Every step of that plan depended on her not doing what she did. His entire operation was built on the assumption that people would feel the wrongness and choose silence. 9 of them did. Corinne didn't. That's cause and effect as plain as I've ever seen it. The choice to stay honest with yourself, even when honesty is inconvenient and uncomfortable and might cost you something you didn't want to lose, that choice compounds. It builds a kind of credibility with your own mind that makes the next hard decision slightly easier. Corinne trusted her gut because she'd trusted it before. She reached out because she'd built, over years, the kind of relationship with me where reaching out felt possible. None of that happened by accident. It was the accumulation of small, unglamorous choices made over a long time. I'm not telling you to be suspicious of everyone who is kind to you. I'm telling you that your instincts are a form of intelligence, and intelligence deserves to be taken seriously. If something doesn't add up, numbers that seem too good, timelines that feel rushed, a document that's long and professional and somehow doesn't say anything concrete, slow down. Find someone who knows how to look at it. Ask the question you're embarrassed to ask. The window is always closing. Don't let that be the reason you stay quiet.